Thank you for staying with us. Reactions continue to emerge following the death of Chief Edwin Clark, a leading nationalist and Ijaw leader who died on Monday night. Elder Edwin Clark was a distinguished figure who served as Commissioner for Education in the Midwestern region from 1968 to 1971. He later took on the role of Commissioner for Finance and Establishment in the defunct Bendel State from 1972 to 1975. At the federal level, he was appointed Commissioner for Information in 1975 and subsequently served as a senator from 1979 to 1983. Throughout his career, Clark dedicated much of his time to promoting inter-ethnic harmony and security in the Niger Delta region. Joining us via Zoom from Enugu for this conversation is PR consultant, public affairs analyst, Dr. Ambrose Igboke. Ambrose, good morning. It's good to have you join us.
And this is my first time on the brand new studio. Congratulations to TVC.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Now, the death of Pa Edwin Clark coming on the heels of the passing of the Pan-Yoruba leader, Pa Ayo Adebanjo, and so many have been speaking about the passing of these persons. But let's get your perspective on the person of Edwin Clark, what he stood for the Ijaw people and the nation at large.
Now, I think the Ijaw people have been lucky, very, very lucky with some nationalistic leaders over the years. One of them is Pa Edwin Clark. He has been there. Remember the Ijaw Asiga Dakaburu, people like Kensaro Wiwa, even the younger brother of Pa Edwin Clark through his poem, J.P. Clark. But Pa Edwin Clark has been around for a very long time. Most of these other leaders have a short spell. They didn't live as long as Pa Edwin Clark. Pa Edwin Clark has been there since the 50s, when he became a councillor in the old, Bomadi, where he, since 1956, where he has been a councillor, came back, joined the NCNC, West African Student Union when he was in London, came back, joined the NCNC for the First Republic, and he has been very active. There's something that distinguishes Pa Edwin Clark. It's not just a politician. He's an advocate for his people. And he's vociferous. He's not a quiet person that just looks the other way when things go wrong. Many leaders in his generation stood out for something, and he stood out and continued. Even in the face of losing government patronage, he still castigates or criticizes every government in power that feels that offending his people. He looks out for policies against his people and talks about it. And he has written so many open letters, to different presidents and heads of state. He's not afraid to speak his mind. And, during the twilight of his life in the last 10, 15 years, he has gone beyond the Ijaw region. He has gone beyond that to see how to unite the southern Nigeria by midwifing the creation and establishment of Southern Middle Belt Forum, which he headed, and then of course Pa Adebanjo was also his vice. So it's very an eerie coincidence that his deputy left just a few days apart, a few hours, maybe 36 or 72 hours apart. And then he followed immediately. So that was an eerie coincidence that sometimes you now start saying that the mystical nature of life. So Pa Edwin Clark, to all intents and purposes, lived a fulfilled life.
Interesting. So, but throughout his career, Chief Edwin Clark was a vocal proponent of restructuring Nigeria to address imbalances in governance and resource allocation. Notably, he consistently called for implementation of the CONFAB, the 2014 CONFAB. So how do you think his contribution to the national discourse has influenced, the current discussion on the federalism or true federalism in the country?
That was one of the paradoxes in Chief Edwin Clark's life. That's why I refer to it as paradox, because in 1966, when there was a conference called to see if there could be a kind of confederation in Nigeria, to start looking at options of confederation. Edwin Clark led a group of people that went against any form of confederation. Confederation means, confederating is having some sort of serious independence on their own. But coming back now to start championing almost 50 years down the line, or 50 years down the line, coming to now champion federalism and restructuring is kind of antithetical to what he stood for in 1966. But, I won't, you won't hold him responsible for that, because the Nigeria of the 60s is not the Nigeria of the millennia. So I think by benefit of the hindsight was that the trajectory of our political and socioeconomic growth between that period to the period now he started agitating for true federalism were quite different. The Nigeria of the 60s was very comfortable with what we had because the region, the way they were totally federal, because they were kind of enjoying some sort of economic independence from the center, not what we have in Abuja now, or what we have existing now, where the federated units go to Abuja every month, cap in hand, begging for what they call federal allocation. So it's not supposed to be. So maybe that is why now in 2014 I said, no, we have to go back to what we had in the 60s. And that is why we are where we are today, where we are stagnated. So for them who saw Nigeria work, between 60s, 70s, knew that we needed to go back to, and that is why he was very vociferous about it and advocated for true federalism, because that is the only way Nigeria can truly grow. And he stood by that, fought for that, even till the end.
Right. Now, would you say that he achieved his dream before he passed, because he stood for justice, equity, environmental issues? He championed the call for environmental issues, especially he was an activist and all of it, especially for the Ijaw people and all of that. There are those who say that his passing, he didn't necessarily see what he was championing for. But from your perspective, do you think that he got that?
Yes, I think he got that, because he himself said it. When he was in his 90th birthday, he said something about being fulfilled, that most of the things he fought for and championed for in his lifetime, that he feels fulfilled as a man in his 90 years old then. So he's fulfilled because the quest for freedom, the quest for the precepts of what he was fighting for, are not things that it's not a sprint dash, it's a marathon. And you would say, and it's also a marathon that has to do with a relay race where you give the baton to the next person. He has done his own, and he has done very well. And he has succeeded in advocacy for it. First of all, it was a rallying point, especially after the death of Saro, where, the Ijaw people were kind of, when they speak somehow, they were not, they were afraid. He and this other good old lady, I think Mrs. Briggs, and some other people came together to find a new force. And you can see that it was a rallying point. Remember sometime in the late 90s, where the agitations by youth in the Niger Delta started, where they now started having so many militant groups and all those things. He was also one of the people that tried to midwife and make sure that amnesty happened, there was peace returned. And remember the wins they had. The onshore dichotomy issue was also solved. These were some of the advocacies they had. The derivation revenue for oil producing areas were also, remember that because of those advocacy, they created the old UMPADEC, which later turned to NDDC. And so all these things are quick wins for the Niger Delta people. I remember the court cases that international IOCs, we had judgments they got against them. Remember the efforts to clean up the Ogoni land, the crusade against spillage of oil. These are things that were even taken beyond the shores of Nigeria. So they had a lot of wins, because if they didn't do those advocacies, perhaps nothing would have ever happened at all. So for those saying that they didn't have, they achieved a lot. But it's as I said earlier, it's a marathon. And the next generation will take over from him and see how they finally succeed in making sure that we have true federalism in Nigeria, and the Niger Delta deserves a share.
Right, if you look at Chief Clark's interaction with various administrations, it's quite complex. It went from being an unofficial advisor to former President Goodluck Ebele Jonathan. And then later on, the subsequent administration of President Muhammad Buhari, he was a very staunch critic of Muhammad Buhari. And looks like critics now see it as him taking sides with certain administration. And then you see the way it is in Rivers State, where it appears to be to have aligned with the incumbent governor, Fubara, against Nyesom Wike, where people are also saying, well, as an elder statesman, you ought to have mediated between these warring parties. How do you describe, this shifting of relationships and how it affected, or probably it impacted, his perception as rather being a nationalist or someone who mediates between warring parties for the betterment of not just Rivers State, but the entire country at large?
I think there's a fallacy in Nigeria which suggests that because you're a statesperson or you're in a position of authority or a religious person, you shouldn't take sides. When there's a contest between truth and falsehood, you have to take sides. You shouldn't start in the middle and vacillate and say, oh, because I said you shouldn't condemn. Actions have to be condemned. And when many Nigerians have condemned the actions taken by the FCT minister, especially mainly in the affairs in the Rivers State, and by Edwin Clark condemned that very, very well. But again, the same man who condemned it, just recently, he set up, I think October last year or something like that, he set up a committee which is headed by Obon Victor Attah, to see if, to try to now, and some other elders in the Niger Delta, to try to reconcile the two people, that is FCT Minister, Governor Wike, and then Governor Sim Subara. The same person also made sure that committee, reconciliation committee, was set up. But that does not reveal the fact that you have to take a stand when you see some certain issues. So for me, he was a pragmatist who was grounded on a fact, not sentiments and emotions. So you could see he wrote a lot of open letters to sitting governors, presidents. He was not afraid. I will liken him to Chief Olusegun Obasanjo, who also did that. I remember what happened to Chief Obasanjo. Remember very well that even Chief Obasanjo went to jail for being vociferous and was nearly killed during the Abacha era. So for such men, there are very few of them. And he has remained very vociferous till the end. And he was not afraid to speak his mind. He was a fierce critic. He wrote many open letters. And till the end, you must give it to him that he was very consistent and maintained the same trajectory. He cannot be perfect. Hence, he will have some of his few faults here and there. But overall, we will say he did a very great job.
All right. Now, earlier on, you mentioned he passing the baton to the next generation. If you look at commentaries that have been coming up as a result of his death, there are those who say that with his passing, it's looking quite scary now that there are no persons who can, wear his shoes because of what he did, who can stand up to the government, speak truth to power, ensure justice. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, do you think that there are those who can wear his shoes and continue from where he stopped, building on the works he has done?
To be sincere, I'm afraid there are people still left behind in the Niger Delta. Maybe the good old lady I mentioned before, Ms. Briggs, I think after that, I don't know. Because the old war horses had convictions, they had ideologies that they stood for, and they followed those ideologies. But it's unfortunate that the generation of leaders we have now, and even those coming after them, do not suggest their behaviors and antecedents do not suggest that they have those kind of convictions. So I'm afraid for Niger Delta that most of the leaders we have now are just leaders that are more concerned about themselves, about their political interests, and not the interest of the people. So it will be very difficult to actually see that generation coming up, to fill his shoes. For now, I don't see anybody in the Niger Delta filling those shoes. But again, maybe his absence will not create the necessary impetus for people to now try to assume some kind of father figure for the Ijaw nation, the Niger Delta, southern Nigeria, Nigeria at large for Edwin Clark. So sometimes, nature abhors a vacuum, and the vacuum has created, of course, those living will try to fill it up, and time only will tell.
Interesting. So looking at his legacy, you will recall in 2015, Chief Clark founded Edwin Clark University in his hometown in Kiagbodo, Delta State. And then he once revealed that he sold his personal property to fund the establishment of this university, aiming to prevent familial disputes after over inheritance, over his long gone. So I'm wondering how intriguing you find this, because what this decision, what does it reveal about his personality and his personal value and his advancement for societal development?
Yeah, I would say that, it was coming late, but as they say, never late than never. Remember his contemporaries, people like, although they were quite his senior, but you will find out that people like Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, Michael Okpara, people like Chief Obafemi Awolowo, Ahmadu Bello, they're all established universities. But, that time there was no private universities. So they're all established universities for their various regions. Remember Obafemi Awolowo establishing universities in Ibadan, Lagos, and Ife. Ahmadu Bello establishing one in Zaria, and Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe establishing one in Nsukka, the University of Nigeria. So the generation could see that they valued what education stood for, and they promoted it. In his own time, as a commissioner in Midwestern region, we remember that he was one that midwifed the creation and the birthing of, I think it's called the Midwest Technical College, that metamorphosed into what we call University of Benin today. It was the progenitor of the University of Benin. So you could see that it's also contributed to the education, and from some of the schools that were established in what we call the Niger Delta today was also his handiwork as commissioner. So he has contributed a lot to education, then becoming the education minister too. And in his federal commissioner of education, he did pretty well until his successor was also could not, continue as federal his legacies as federal commissioner of education. And we could see what happened when we had the Ali Must Go protest in 1976 after he must have left. Coming in the twilight of his life to set up a university also reinforces that his belief in education. And in the era of private universities, I think he has also done well to leave a legacy, apart from the legacies he had in public service for education, to now do his own private legacy. And it behoves of the family he left behind to ensure that the legacies continue. And thank God there is a family of well-educated people just like him. I think his son is also a professor. And, coming from a family that has someone also like Professor J.P. Clark, a world-renowned poet, the family, I think, should sustain that legacy to ensure that the university thrives and lives as a befitting memorial for the legacy of Chief Edwin Clark.
Quickly, before we let you go, do you think that he was honored and appropriately recognized while he was alive? And if not, how do we do that for him in death?
Well, you see, in Nigeria, we wait for people to die before we immortalize them. I think it's a wrong tradition, and that should be scrapped. People should be immortalized when they're alive so that they can feel it, they can celebrate it, they can feel appreciated. The dead does not know if you are naming something after him. It's only the living. So it's only when a sitting governor or a sitting president, you will name things now, which is a very bad example, when you name things after sitting presidents. I think it's a height of psychophancy taken too far. We shouldn't be naming things after sitting political leaders, right? That we should name things after other statesmen that have contributed, to very, very serious national development. And some of them are still there. We shouldn't wait for them to die. We should create these things when they are alive and invite them to even cut the tape and they will be there. That we shouldn't be setting up Mussolinium named universities after them when they are far gone. It happened to almost everybody. It happened to Obafemi Awolowo. It was when he died, Ife was renamed Obafemi Awolowo. Nnamdi Azikiwe died before University of Awka was renamed the Nnamdi Azikiwe University. And so on. Ahmadu Bello also was gone when Zaria was named after him. There are replete examples we can name. That shouldn't happen. When people have contributed to national development, they should be, celebrated while they are alive. And we should make conscious effort from now on to start immortalizing people when they are alive so that the mortality will continue even in their mortal departure.
That he has passed to immortalize him.
Yeah, we have to immortalize him. I mean, the initiative should not be led for the Niger Delta alone. I mean, for the federal government alone. The Niger Delta should make conscious efforts to immortalize at least all the states in the Niger Delta. In the 6 states, I should, especially the states that have the dual nationality, should be try to immortalize it. Rivers State should do quickly to do that. Bayelsa should do so. Delta should do so. Even Akwa Ibom State should do so. Let them, find befitting legacies to places to name after him. Be it streets, major highways, be it public infrastructure, be it universities, and some other things to be named after Pa Edwin Clark. In the Niger Delta, it will not be bad to have his name in all the states I've mentioned. It's not too much because he paid the price for all of them, and they should be able to, accord him some befitting immortalization while he has departed.
Right, very quickly, let me see if I can squeeze in this question. I had a one-to-one or one-on-one conversation with Chief Ayo Adebanjo, and then we have Edwin Clark, who just passed. What did these people do differently, especially Edwin Clark, if you know, what did they do differently to stay very active in their later days? 97 is quite way, a higher age that anyone can attain, and they were very active on national discourse very quickly. In less than a minute, if you can.
What they did differently was that they didn't just stay in their cocoon. They are of a luxury. They're self-made men. They had all the wealth that's comfort and that can provide them all the comforts. And they were very comfortable men. Their children are doing well. These are made men. So naturally, they are not even supposed to be agitating for all those things they do. But they kept at it, despite their, comfort or whatever that life have afforded them. They kept on. So that's what they did differently. Our generation don't do that. What they do is that they even, tell you why you're even risking yourself, why you're risking your life. You are okay. You are fighting for the masses. The masses you are fighting for don't even recognize you are fighting for them, and all kinds of negative statements. And that's what they did differently. There are many of their mates won't come out to say things because they are beneficiaries of government or some other things, but they didn't care. They did it, and one other person that's still doing that is Chief Olusegun Obasanjo. So that generation, some of them still have the strength of conviction to carry it to the old age, and that is things we will miss that they did differently. That I fear this generation may not even try to do.
That's a fine place to leave the conversation. Dr. Ambrose Igboke, PR consultant, public affairs analyst. Thank you for your time on the program.
Thank you so much.